Welcome to my talk, Design Operations, Why Operations Are Important Within User Experience Design Departments. Now, I gave a version of this talk during a design conference back in December called Design Shots, but I decided that it would make sense to put this on YouTube and basically share my experience about this topic with you. My name is Brian Lawrence. I am currently providing pro bono strategic and technical consulting to startups in partnership with a venture capital firm. The majority of my career, however, I've been into technology, pretty much since I could first read when my dad brought home an Apple II computer. I spent time playing some amazing games like Frogger, and once he brought home an Apple Macintosh sometime in, I think it was 1987, I just never looked back. My first program was using a scripting language that was similar to C. It was called Salt, and it enabled me to build scripts so that I could play role-playing games, multi-user dungeon text-based games to earn some experience for my characters because it took a lot of time. I studied computer science at Drexel University in Philadelphia, USA, and I got a job in healthcare IT in 2002. Since that time, I've had various roles. I started as a software engineer, programming primarily in C++, Java, and JavaScript. I then moved to become a Scrum Master once Agile became a thing in my company. And then I entered the dark side of management in 2010. Over the years, I've also dabbled during my nights and weekends as an aspiring entrepreneur. Always with a focus on career development. It's kind of a passion of mine. From 2012 to 2018, I was part of Career Bootcamp Coaches, LLC, and we developed a digital career coach. But the purposes of this talk and the reason that I'm presenting this to you is because for the past 5 years, from 2016 to 2021, I was part of a very large enterprise user experience organization. And for the past year of my time in the corporate world, I was focusing specifically on design operations. So today, I bring some of that experience to you as we cover what is design ops, when did this become a thing, when you should care, and finally some tips and tricks on how to start and what to think about as you do start and as your team grows over the next decade, hopefully. I think user experience organizations will continue to grow as people realize how important user experience is when it comes to software. We will start with what is design ops. Let's start with where we think this term came from. Google says that the origination of the term design ops came from Dave Malouf. Dave is one of those UX celebrities that some of you may know. According to the Design Ops Handbook by DesignBetter.co, which is basically the InVision company, Dave came up with this term around 2014 after he was immersed in the world of agile development, which is, my experience as well over the past 2 decades dealing with software development, with Scrum, with DevOps, you name it. So Dave, if you're watching, thanks for introducing this term. Here is a brief history based off of some of my research. We'll start with the Agile Manifesto. Now, on February 11th to the 13th, 2001, 17 software professionals who were really sick of heavy documentation and the waterfall model, they met in the mountains of Utah, United States, and they created the Agile Manifesto. This is a document that sets out key values and principles such as customer collaboration and continuous delivery with the goal to optimize how development teams work. I saw the direct impact of this manifesto in my day-to-day work when my company hired Agile experts like Micah Martin, the son of Bob Martin, and J.B. Rainsberger, who is a JUnit expert, a unit testing expert. And this really started to change, a change in the industry and how software was developed. And of course, you see it today. In 2009, the first conference named DevOps Days was held in Ghent, Belgium. and the term DevOps started to get traction. I believe I started hearing more about DevOps shortly after 2010. And DevOps is really basically the combining of development and operations, as you can see in the image on the slide. In 2013, the Phoenix Project book, a novel about IT, DevOps, and helping your business win, was released. Honestly, this is one of my all-time favorite DevOps books, so you have to read this if you are in software development, regardless of what department you're in or what your role is. I guarantee this is a good book that you'll learn something from and be entertained as well. And then, like I mentioned earlier, according to Google, Dave Malouf coined the term design ops in 2014. And what you're seeing here on the slide is an image of the design ops landscape from Nielsen Nelson, which we'll get to in a little bit. Okay, so now we know where design ops came from. Thanks again, Dave. Now let's talk about the goal. What is the goal of design ops? Which will then help us figure out the why you want to consider spending your time on this in your organization. So first thing we'll do is we'll ask some of those pioneers in UX and pioneers in the design ops space. We'll start with Dave, so the guy who coined the term. Dave is currently a director of design operations at Teladoc Health. Unlike me, he decided to recently join the corporate world, so good luck, buddy. I'm sure he's going to make a positive impact. But Dave says that design ops is everything that supports high-quality crafts, methods, and processes. So if you want high-quality craft, methods, and process, design ops will help. Dave also provides some insight into what operations is in his opinion. He mentions tools, infrastructure, workflow, people, and governance being operations. Kim Marchant. So Kim is a design operations lead. She's at JP Morgan Chase and Company. And I found this quote on her post called A Short History of Design Operations on Medium, the website Medium. The role of design operations is to make this process as painless as possible for all involved through operationalizing the practice of design to help deliver consistent, on-brand, high-quality experiences for customers, and to look after the people doing the work throughout. Pretty good definition. Next person, Fabrizio Texietta. I'm not sure if I said that right. He's a partner and designer at Work & Co. And he's also the founder of the UX Collective site, which is where I found his definition. It is the department or single person that plans, defines, and manages the design process within an organization. Their goal is to ensure the design team becomes a well-oiled machine, functioning at high efficiency, low friction, and generating high-quality design outputs. And most importantly, they help figure out the way the design team will release the product of their work back into the development cycle. Key points here are a well-oiled machine functioning at high efficiency with high-quality design outputs. Thanks, Fabrizio. Now, I've always wanted to have someone quote me, so what better way to get that to happen than to quote myself, right? But I like to think of design ops as the combination of culture, practices, and infrastructure that enables research and development optimization. So UX professionals can focus on what they were hired to do, which is to design delightful software. Now, I stole the idea of delightful design from my previous boss, Paul Weaver, who is now at Hyatt leading user experience there. He had a vision for software at my company that we work together at in healthcare, in that healthcare IT could be delightful if we did it right, instead of, not so delightful. Now, I do have confidence that healthcare IT in general is moving in the right direction because of the fact that UX is becoming more of a focus for healthcare IT companies, and that delightful software in healthcare will exist at some point in the future. By the way, some of you might be thinking, and I've heard this before, if software is delightful but not usable, then what's the point? Of course, I agree with you 100%. To be delightful, it has to be usable. So I stand by my definition. So let's take a look back and think about from these previous quotes, what is it? Design operations, what is it really? The previous quotes provide some of what it is. Dave said operations are tools, infrastructure, workflow, people, and governance. Kim mentions process, practice, and people. Fabricio mentions process and calls out a department. And I mention culture, I mention practices, and I mention infrastructure. When I was first introduced to this concept of design operations, it was from an article sent to me created by the Nielsen Norman Group, or NNG. If you're watching this, you probably are familiar with NNG, a fantastic organization. They organized the idea of design ops using what they call the design ops landscape. If you do a Google search for design ops, the definition by NNG will probably be what you see with a link to the article that introduces this landscape. This is a great way to understand what design ops is for sure. In fact, I base a lot of how I operated off of this landscape, but for the purposes of this presentation, this talk, I will focus on culture, practices, and infrastructure, which includes most of what the design ops landscape is that NNG uses. Okay, so now we know design ops concept was introduced in 2014 thanks to the Agile Manifesto, DevOps, and just general progress in how software is developed. The goal is the enablement of research and development for the most part. So UX professionals can focus on what they were hired to do. Again, design delightful software or experiences. And the what is design ops being a combination of culture, practices, and infrastructure. So we've got a very high level definition of design so far. Before I go into more detail about how my organization and I approach design ops using culture, practices, and infrastructure, let's first talk about when you should really start to think about this or when you should care about this. So you're listening to this, so you must have some interest in design operations. But you may be wondering if the time is right to start integrating this concept into your job or your organization. Let's take 3 potential scenarios. You may be a very small team of designers, or maybe you're just a solo UXer in a startup doing everything from research to interaction design to visual design or even maybe coding. Or you might be a member of a medium-sized team of, let's say, 10, which is fairly large, right? 10 UXers. Or you might be a member of a very large team of UX professionals in a corporation, an enterprise user experience team. And in your organization, your UX organization, you might have specific defined roles like researcher or content analyst or interaction designer or visual designers. Honestly, it doesn't matter what your team looks like or where you are in your UX maturity as a team. The simple facts are that design ops calls out responsibilities that should be handled in your organization. Now is the time to start, because there's never going to be a perfect time to start something. Sometimes you just need to start. I think that's a wise piece of advice no matter what you're doing. So now you know you should be thinking about this right now, regardless of your situation. How can we do design ops pragmatically? Like, really, what does this mean? And that's what we're going to get to next. To start, let me explain how our UX leadership team decided to start with this transformation at the end of 2020 to improve how we operated. So as a UX team, we had been together for a while, and our team had massively expanded. We basically had outgrown our original structure, UX structure, and it was time to reorganize ourselves to account for that growth that we had just experienced. So we started working on what that new structure should look like, or we reached out to leaders on the team, and we started to compile suggestions. We identified problem areas by discussing with our employees and through employee surveys to see what we thought was working and what wasn't. In fact, It was one of our employee surveys that clearly called out the need to change. During this time, one of the decisions that was made was to create a new operational role focused only on operations. You see, up until this point, no one only had an operational focus. Everyone had operational focus on top of their other core responsibilities, whether that was doing research, designing, or managing people. To be successful and meet the goal of optimizing research and design, we decided that we needed focus and accountability. So the new role of design ops manager was created and became a reality. I took on that role. Now, at the time, I was managing a large team of global designers, so it did take some time to move them to their new managers based on our new organizational structure. And if you're trying to look at the structure here on the slide, don't. That's not a real. That was just something I just created using Miro, which is a great tool for fun. That's not actually what our organization looked like. It just gives you an idea that we went through this process to create a new organization with design ops as a role. Now, I'll give you some more insight into how I went about doing this. The next thing I did as a designer, technically I'm kind of a designer wannabe, considering my engineering background, but I do know a good way to approach a problem. And what I did was I put together a 6-month plan to discover, define, develop, and deliver a working design ops system to the organization. To start, we had to define what we thought ops should own. And then I discovered what was being done on the team, who was doing it, and what the current state was, so I could take ownership of that moving forward. The next several slides will walk through the areas we as a team identified to live within operations. Now, this does not mean that these may be the areas you or your team might want to focus on first. It was just what made sense for our team at the time. So we're going to start first with culture. So what do you think would fit into culture? If you are thinking people, yes, absolutely. What else might fit? Well, we decided that communication would fall under the culture umbrella and was one of the areas that design ops should own. And when I mention communication, this is internal and external communication. Let's take a deeper look at people. We decided that design ops would be the main point of contact with HR, recruiting, and our contingent workforce group within the organization. I mentioned I was part of a very large team, and that team was about 150 UX professionals, which translates to many managers hiring, right? I did my best to be the bridge between all of our managers and those people departments that existed. That was especially helpful when HR would push an initiative out. I, as a design ops guy responsible for people, would be able to understand what that request was and then coordinate with our managers and the entire team to make sure we did our due diligence. A good example of success, in my opinion, was that during this time, we were able to really put together a consistent plan across the whole UX department for re-entry, which no longer with the company, but I believe it's still a work in progress considering where we are with COVID. But at least we followed the plan and we had focus. Another part of people was team education. So one of the areas of improvement identified by our employee survey was to provide time and better education so UXers could develop their skill sets. So by having someone who owns this and is responsible for making sure it happens, I, as a design ops guy in charge of team education, was able to get 2 full team trainings with actually NNG scheduled, while also getting some internal courses available that didn't exist yet or weren't available yet. So that was good. Okay. And then finally, onboarding. This was owned by several different people. In fact, we had one associate who had revamped the entire onboarding experience for designers as an and project. But by making this the responsibility of ops, we were able to get a committee formed and started making some traction, not only on making sure new employees were properly onboarded, but also focus on continuous improvement and maintenance of that onboarding material. With regard to communication, does your own UX team have internal meetings? How often do you have them? Who owns the agenda? Does anyone own the agenda? Who runs the meeting? When you have a team of 150, this is not a trivial task. So as the ops guy, I took ownership of the meeting, schedules, agenda, scheduling, speakers, and honestly also emceeing our monthly syncs. Now, MC stands for Master of Ceremonies, which basically meant I was responsible for making sure the 1 to 2 hours we spent together every month was valuable. Also, team-wide internal communications. What this looked like was design ops owning the email distribution lists, other internal channels that we use for communication like Teams, and also sending out the occasional email as a reminder about, say, a timesheet or important information such as COVID response or entry. This also included leadership updates to make sure that the leaders, the senior leadership team, knew what was happening in the design ops space. For me, what I did was I put together a monthly design ops report and reviewed it with the senior leadership team. It contained updates about each area in the design ops span. And finally, external communication. So our user experience team already had an external UX presence, including a Twitter account and the occasional post on Medium. At one point, there was even a monthly newsletter that went out. Now for me, this was a tough one. And what I did is I approached it by connecting with the larger company leaders in marketing and social media, and then put together a communication committee to help come up with an external communication strategy in partnership with the larger company strategy. Okay, that was culture. The practices. This is basically the process you have put into place for your organization that others on the team are expected to follow. For us, this was an interesting one. Our organization in general was adopting a new way to practice product management. The key here was that we, UX, and the UX organization was engaged in that process. But we already had that being handled by several leaders. So processes like how we operate via user-centered design and the rest of the organization or project management in general didn't fall under my design ops purview, but it certainly is part, in my opinion, is absolutely part of design operations. In here. And what we'll do in practices, we'll include project management. We'll include UCD process, so user-centered design process. But we'll also include budget in this section, which honestly I did own as part of the design ops person. So for project management, we'll dive a little deeper here. As I mentioned, my ops responsibilities did not include this, but I do think this role should exist under operations in the ideal world, at least Brian's ideal world. If your organization has a central pool of designers supporting multiple projects, as requests come through, you need to be able to determine who works on that project, right? Ideally, the company does project management in a way to include UX, but that's not always the case, especially when you're in an organization that is not staffed with the appropriate number of UX professionals. I can't imagine any of you are in that position. But this is more often, this happens, and in the case where you have a UX organization with multiple requests coming in, someone needs to be able to evaluate requests, prioritize who gets help, and then make sure the right resources are assigned to help, depending on the detail of the project. Another area that should fall under design ops would be tracking progress to assure the UX professional has everything they need to do their job. What if they are blocked? Or they're waiting on a business analyst to prioritize a request? What if a researcher and a research recruiter isn't getting the support they need to find participants for a study? This responsibility could be included here. Okay. UCD process. So someone must define what user-centered design process looks like at your company that you will follow as a team, and also how that process integrates with the rest of your company. This was, again, not my responsibility because we had a focused team that was created already to define how we did UCD at our company. But it should fall, honestly, under design ops. Okay. Education and integration of process within the company process management, product management process. So work with your company to integrate UCD into the process, making sure people who make decisions understand the importance of user research, testing, a user-centered design approach. In fact, it's not just others outside of your UX team that needs to know this. It would be inside your team, outside your team as well. Every UX team member must understand this. So as part of this, you also have to make sure education happens. Okay, budget, finally. Practices. This is pretty a lot of stuff falls under practices, but budget is one of them. So depending on who your team reports up through, you may fall within an existing budget, or you may have your own budget. In our organization, we had a budget, and design ops was responsible for making sure we had the money we needed to do our jobs. This included money needed for software, tools, money needed for travel, money needed for education, you name it. If we needed money to do something, we had to make sure the budget covered it. And if you're doing budgeting right, it's not just a matter of planning, but you also need to make sure that you're a good steward of your money. So someone needs to track the budget and also approve requests. And in the case of our organization, design ops was responsible for that. So that was practices. The next and final space we will look at today. This is basically everything your designer needs to do their job. If you have a car or a train ready to take you somewhere, but no roads or tracks, well, you're kind of in trouble. In terms of infrastructure, what we put under infrastructure was asset management and design frameworks. So let's take a look at asset management. Hardware, assuring that our UX team had the laptops, monitors, mobile devices to do their jobs. For me, DevOps was responsible for this, and I was the point person with the enterprise asset management team, ensuring that as new employees joined, they had what they needed, or when there was a problem, we were able to get it resolved. Software, making sure the team had the software to do their jobs. I was the point person with the software management team, making sure we had the licenses we needed. In my case, I also had a UX tools committee that met once a month to discuss any new software that we might want to investigate. Software in general in enterprise companies is a really important area, because if you, as a UX team in an enterprise, if you want to use this tool, use that tool, you have to make sure that the tool has been vetted and approved by your software team in the company. For example, if you use some sort of startup tool that has been infiltrated by a hacker, that's not good for your security. And since we were in healthcare, security was really important. So it was important that we had someone to be responsible for that. Finally, under asset management, digital assets. So does your team have a central location for icons, for example? What about any other reusable components, libraries, or templates that may be needed that align with the design standards that your team has created? So your UX designers don't have to reinvent the wheel every time and can simply pull those components as they design the product. Okay, design framework. We'll take a look at that now. So design framework consists of many things. You may have a published set of higher level design principles to guide your team on how to approach various user needs. The goal is to make sure you have reusable components to have some consistency within your applications and to make sure your framework is user-friendly and backed by research. Design standards, the lower level guidance that your team should use as they develop and as they design. And then finally, visual standards, style guides. These are the standards that your team needs to follow. Make sure that you're following brand. And honestly, all of these things together should make your UX professional's job a little bit easier because you will then be able to focus on the real design challenges instead of the small ones. So that's infrastructure. So now we have a high-level view of design operations, at least again, design ops from my perspective. We covered culture, we covered practices, and we covered infrastructure. I mentioned now is the time to think about this, but you might also be thinking, yeah, right. No one is going to create a new role in my organization. Remember, my team created this role because we were experiencing growing issues. But you know what? If we would have looked at each of these areas and asked ourselves, are we doing these things? And if we are we doing them well? We would have realized way before 2020 that we had a gap. What I would suggest is to literally go down this list and ask the question, are we doing this now and how well? Do the analysis from these areas. What are your biggest pain points? If you solve those, what would the return of investment be? You could then use that to create a proposal and then have a conversation with your boss or your boss's boss. Communication, team meetings. You could track how those team meetings are happening now, and are you getting appropriate speakers? You could post team meeting surveys to help with your metrics. You might need to get more goal oriented when you start out, for example. Internal, external communication might just be a set of goals that you need to hit. So, for example, have a draft strategy by Q1 for communication, have that strategy finalized by Q3, implementation started Q4. Project management, you could track requests, times to assign, time to complete, group by priority. UCD, when you first start, do you have a defined process? Has your team been educated? Has it been integrated? You could track that. Budget, very boring, of course, but make sure your budget is planned and managed. If you are really good, you could show how with design ops, you need less budget, but obviously as you grow, you're going to need more, so that's always a little tricky. Asset management, there's a lot here. This varies, right? How to track what metrics to use could vary here. Are team members getting their hardware or software when they need it? For example, like when your new employee starts, do they have their hardware right as they start? Doesn't always happen. Digital assets, are they being maintained? Are they being used? Is there a way to track that? Design frameworks, similar to UCD process, what is defined still needs to be defined. You could track progress there. You could try to track adherence to standards, usage of standards, which believe me is always a tough challenge. Having to track if your designers or UX organization is following your standards is like having to track engineers to make sure they're following design standards. It's very, very difficult. So my approach to that has always been make it easy, make it impossible not to follow them. That'll make your life and your designers' lives much easier. Okay, so one last piece of advice here in terms of metrics. Metrics, there's a lot to it. We are claiming that design ops is optimizing the time our team is spending on design. So in theory, team members should be spending less time on administrative or non-UX tasks and more time doing their core job. At my previous company, we tracked time spent on what we call capitalizable projects, which was core UX time most of the time. So that could be a great metric to use, as we could then convert that into savings. More money being spent on development less money is being spent on administrative tasks. You need to find a way to basically speak executive using numbers, and then you could also predict as part of your proposals. For example, if we set up design ops, we could see 5% more time being spent on design the first year, 15% the second, etc. You need to figure out a way to track and then use those metrics to sell the fact that having a design operations focus in your company will be beneficial. Because honestly, it will. It will. Okay. That's all I have for you today. It was a ton. If you're still with me right now, good job. I mean, it's been 35 minutes and you're still here, so that's fantastic. I appreciate you watching. I'm hopeful that this information was helpful. Now, there's a lot of resources out there if you're interested in doing that design ops analysis or creating that proposal for your organization. You're going to have to spend time figuring this out. You're going to have to spend time doing research. But if you're a UXer, you understand the importance of research. Design ops, don't forget, design ops is a combination of culture, practices, and infrastructure that enables research and development optimization. So UX professionals can focus on what they were hired to do. Design delightful software. These links that you're seeing here, I will provide to you in the Design Ops handout. So at the bottom in the description of this YouTube video, there'll be a link to a Google Drive PDF, which is what you're seeing here, the Design Ops handout, which gives you the summary view of my definition of Design Ops and what I included under those areas, as well as these links to really important resources. NNG resources, Design Ops handbook I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, Design Ops Summit. So there's a Design Ops Summit that has happened over the past several years, and these links will bring you right to the recordings of the talks in the summits, which are pretty helpful. And then finally some blogs. You can't see it with my face in there, but the handout will also link to some. That's all I have. There are many resources available. See presentation images if you're interested. If you ever want to create a presentation recorded on YouTube and not have to worry about copyright or image infringement or anything like that, great place you can go to is Unsplash. So all of the images in this presentation that weren't created or taken by me came from Unsplashed. And again, this handout that I just shared with you will be linked at the bottom of this. So that's it. Thanks again. And I wish you all of the luck with design operations in your organization. If you have any questions or comments or want to reach out to me, please reach out. Reach out on YouTube. I'd be happy to talk to you and talk about design ops, talk about project management, talk about software development, talk about career development, whatever it is. Feel free to reach out and have a fantastic day.